My name is Grant Shaw, and I thought I was just being a good person when I donated blood to save a stranger's life. Savannah Gibson, CEO of a billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire, had collapsed moments before her life-saving surgery. With her rare blood type running dangerously low, time was running out. I was already at the hospital waiting for my own daughter's heart surgery when the doctors asked for emergency donors. I stepped forward without hesitation. After all, what if it were my daughter lying there? What I didn't know was that the woman whose life I was saving had given birth to my adopted daughter 9 years ago. The same daughter who was about to undergo surgery just down the hall. One act of kindness between strangers was about to uncover a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, sacrifice, and the invisible threads that connect us all. This is how a single donation revealed a connection that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly a decade, changing 3 lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every morning for the past 9 years, I've started my day the same way. I reach into the top drawer of my nightstand and pull out a small, worn envelope marked for Emma's father in delicate handwriting. Inside is a single photograph, a newborn baby with the tiniest hands I'd ever seen, and a handwritten note that simply says, "Please tell her she was loved from the very first moment." I don't open the envelope every day, but I touch it. I hold it. It's my reminder that my daughter Emma came to me through someone else's impossible sacrifice. The photograph was taken by a nurse the day Emma was born, given to me by the adoption agency, along with that note from her birth mother. 9 years later, I still don't know who wrote those words, but they've shaped how I've raised Emma. Every time I face a difficult decision as a single father, every time I doubt whether I'm enough for her, I remember that somewhere out there, a woman loved my daughter so much that she gave her up so she could have a better life. This morning was different, though. As I held that envelope, my hands were shaking. Not from emotion, but from fear. Today was the day Emma would undergo the heart surgery we'd been preparing for over the past 6 months. At 9 years old, my daughter had already been through more medical procedures than most adults. But this one would determine whether she'd live a normal, healthy life or continue to struggle with the congenital heart condition that had defined her young existence. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer and walked down the hallway to Emma's room. She was already awake, sitting up in bed with her favorite stuffed elephant, reading a medical journal she'd somehow convinced me to buy her last week. That's my Emma. While other kids her age were reading comic books, she was fascinated by cardiothoracic surgery and wanted to understand exactly what Dr. Peterson would be doing to fix her heart. "Morning, Dad," she said without looking up from the journal. "Did you know that the human heart beats approximately 100,000 times per day? That means by the time I'm your age, my heart will have beaten over 1.3 billion times." I sat on the edge of her bed, marveling as I did every day at the brilliant mind housed in such a fragile body. "That's a lot of beats, sweetheart. Think yours is ready for a little tune-up today?" She finally looked up at me with those wise brown eyes that seemed to hold far more understanding than any 9-year-old should possess. "I'm not scared, Dad. Dr. Peterson explained everything. Plus, you'll be there when I wake up, right?" The trust in her voice nearly broke me. Emma had been just 6 weeks old when I adopted her, and for 9 years, it had been just the two of us. Her mother, my wife Rachel, had died in a car accident when Emma was only 2. Since then, Emma and I had become a team, facing every challenge together, the endless medical appointments, the sleepless nights when her heart condition flared up, the financial strain of treatments not fully covered by insurance. "I'll be right there, Em, I promise." She nodded and returned to her journal, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she turned the page. She was scared, despite her brave words. How could she not be? But Emma had always been this way. facing her fears with curiosity rather than terror, approaching every medical setback as a puzzle to solve rather than a burden to bear. I stood up and walked to her dresser, where a small jewelry box sat next to her collection of medical textbooks, an odd combination that perfectly summarized my daughter's unique personality. Inside the jewelry box was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm that Emma wore to every medical appointment. It had been a gift from Rachel just weeks before she died, and Emma considered it her good luck charm. "Don't forget this," I said, holding up the bracelet. Emma set down her journal and extended her thin wrist. As I fastened the clasp, I noticed how much she'd grown. The bracelet that had once been loose now fit perfectly. 9 years of watching her grow, learn, struggle, and triumph. 9 years of being her father, her advocate, her biggest cheerleader. And now, in just a few hours, I would hand her over to a surgical team and trust them to repair the one thing about her that I couldn't fix myself. We lived in a modest apartment in downtown Phoenix, about 20 minutes from St. Catherine's Medical Center where the surgery would take place. I'd chosen this apartment specifically because of its proximity to the hospital. Over the years, we'd made countless trips there for Emma's care. The walls of our home were covered with her artwork, her science fair ribbons, and photos of our adventures together. It wasn't much, but it was ours. As we prepared to leave for the hospital, I found myself thinking about that envelope again, about the woman who had written those words 9 years ago. "Please tell her she was loved from the very first moment." I had told Emma about her birth mother, of course. I'd explained that sometimes people make difficult decisions out of love, that her birth mother had wanted her to have opportunities and stability that she couldn't provide at the time. Emma had always accepted this explanation with the same matter-of-fact approach she brought to everything else in her life. "She made a good choice," she told me once when she was 7. "I got you as my dad, and you're exactly who I needed." Now, as we drove toward the hospital in the early morning light, I glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma in the back seat. She had her medical journal open again, but her eyes were focused out the window at the passing cityscape. I wondered if she was thinking about her birth mother too, if she ever imagined what that woman might be doing now, whether she thought about the daughter she'd given up. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that in just a few hours, I would meet that woman. Not as Emma's birth mother, but as a stranger in need of help. A woman whose life I would save, never knowing that she had already saved mine 9 years ago, by trusting me with the most precious gift imaginable. We arrived at St. Catherine's Medical Center at 6:30 a.m., 90 minutes before Emma's scheduled surgery. The hospital was already bustling with activity, nurses hurrying between rooms, doctors reviewing charts, the familiar symphony of beeping monitors and hushed conversations that had become the soundtrack of our lives over the past 9 years. Emma and I were directed to the pre-surgical waiting area on the 7th floor, where families gathered before their loved ones went into operating rooms. It was a space I knew well, unfortunately. The walls were painted in soothing pastels, soft music played from hidden speakers, and large windows offered views of downtown Phoenix. Despite the attempts at creating a calming environment, the tension in the room was always palpable. Today was no different. Emma settled into one of the cushioned chairs with her medical journal while I approached the registration desk. As I handed over our paperwork, I noticed unusual commotion near the elevator banks. Hospital security was directing people away from the VIP surgical suite, and I could hear fragments of urgent conversations between medical staff. "Code Blue, Surgical Suite 12. Code Blue, Surgical Suite 12. The announcement over the hospital's intercom system sent a chill through the waiting area. Suite 12 was just down the hall from where Emma would have her surgery. I watched as a team of doctors and nurses rushed past us, their faces grim with concentration. 20 minutes later, as Emma and I were reviewing her pre-surgical instructions with Nurse Patricia, Dr. Reeves, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery, appeared in our waiting area. His usually composed demeanor showed cracks of stress as he scanned the room. "Excuse me, everyone," he called out, his voice carrying across the waiting area. "We have an emergency situation. We need type AB negative blood donors immediately. If anyone here has that blood type and is willing to help save a life, please let us know right now." The waiting room fell silent. Families looked around at each other, uncertainty written on their faces. Type AB negative was rare. Less than 1% of the population carried it. I knew because Emma had the same blood type, which had complicated some of her previous procedures. I stood up immediately. "I'm AB negative," I said, walking toward Dr. Reeves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His relief was visible. "Thank God. Sir, we have a patient in critical condition who needs an emergency transfusion. Are you willing to donate?" "Of course," I replied without hesitation. "How much do you need?" "We'll need to do a quick screening to make sure you're eligible, but if everything checks out, we'll need 2 units. The patient lost significant blood during what should have been a routine procedure. Her condition has deteriorated rapidly." Emma looked up from her journal, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, what's happening?" I knelt down beside her chair. "Someone else in the hospital needs help, sweetheart. I'm going to donate some blood to help them, just like when you donate blood for your tests. I'll be back before your surgery." She nodded solemnly. "Is it someone having heart surgery too?" "I don't know, Em, but it's someone who needs help, and we help when we can, right?" "Right," she agreed, then surprised me by adding, "Maybe their family is as scared as we are." The wisdom in her observation struck me. Here was my 9-year-old daughter, facing her own major surgery in just over an hour, and her first thought was empathy for another family going through their own crisis. Dr. Reeves led me quickly through the hospital corridors toward the blood donation center adjacent to the surgical suites. As we walked, he explained the situation in hushed, urgent tones. "The patient is a 34-year-old female who was scheduled for gallbladder surgery this morning. What should have been a straightforward laparoscope procedure turned complicated when we discovered unexpected internal bleeding. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low, and she's lost more blood than we initially realized. Is she going to be okay?" I asked as we entered the donation area. "With a transfusion, her prognosis is good." Without a ... he didn't need to finish the sentence. "The challenge is her blood type. AB negative is incredibly rare, and our blood bank is running low. You showing up this morning might literally be the difference between life and death for this woman." As the technician prepared me for the donation, I found myself thinking about the randomness of it all. Here I was, at the hospital for Emma's surgery, and suddenly I was in a position to save someone else's life. It felt like more than coincidence. It felt like purpose. "Can you tell me anything about the patient?" I asked as the needle went into my arm. Dr. Reeves consulted his tablet. "Her name is Savannah Gibson. She's here alone. No family members listed as emergency contacts, which is unusual." The nursing staff mentioned she seemed extremely anxious before the procedure, more so than most patients. Sometimes people who don't have support systems struggle more with medical procedures. My heart went out to the stranger. I couldn't imagine facing surgery without someone there who cared about you. Emma and I had each other, even in our scariest moments. This woman, Savannah, was going through her crisis completely alone. "How long will this take?" I asked, watching my blood flow into the collection bag. "About 15 minutes for the first unit. Then we'll give you a short break and take the second unit. You should be back with your daughter within 45 minutes. As I lay there, I thought about Emma sitting in the waiting room with her medical journal, probably explaining to Nurse Patricia how the cardiovascular system worked. Despite everything she'd been through, she remained curious, optimistic, and caring. The woman whose life I was helping to save was a complete stranger, but I found myself hoping she had people in her life who loved her the way I loved Emma. Irony wasn't lost on me that I was donating blood to save someone else while preparing to hand my own daughter over to surgeons. But that's what we do for each other, isn't it? We show up. We help. We give what we can when someone needs it. That 20 minutes later, as I was recovering from the second donation, Dr. Reeves returned with an update. The transfusion is working. Ms. Gibson's blood pressure has stabilized, and we've controlled the bleeding. You literally saved her life today, Mr. Shaw, Grant Shaw. Mr. Shaw, I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary. Most people would have been too focused on their own family's needs to help a stranger. I shook my head. Anyone would have done the same thing. But as I walked back toward the waiting area where Emma was patiently reading her journal, I realized that wasn't necessarily true. In that moment of crisis, I had made an instinctive choice to help someone I'd never met. It was the same choice someone had made for Emma 9 years ago, choosing to do something difficult because it was right. I had no way of knowing that the woman whose life I had just saved would soon reveal a connection that would change everything I thought I knew about family, sacrifice, and the mysterious ways our lives intersect with those of strangers who aren't strangers at all. When I returned to the waiting area, I found Emma exactly where I'd left her, but she wasn't alone anymore. Nurse Patricia was sitting beside her, and they were deep in conversation about the anatomy of the heart. Emma had her journal open to a detailed diagram, pointing out the different chambers and explaining to Patricia how Dr. Peterson would repair her mitral valve. And that's why the surgeon needs to use a patch graft instead of just stitching it closed, Emma was saying with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. Because my valve opening is too small for my body size, so they need to make it bigger. Patricia looked up as I approached, her eyes filled with something between amazement and concern. Mr. Shaw, your daughter has been teaching me about cardiac surgery for the past 40 minutes. I've been a pediatric nurse for 15 years, and I've never met a patient who understood their own condition this thoroughly. I sat down beside Emma and pulled her close. She's always been curious about how things work, especially when it comes to her own medical care. We learned early on that knowledge helps reduce fear. Dad! Emma's face lit up with relief. How's the person you helped? Did your blood donation work? Yes, sweetheart. The doctor said the patient is stable now. She's going to be okay. Emma nodded seriously. Good. Nurse Patricia told me that people with our blood type are called universal plasma donors. That means we can help lots of different people in emergencies. I looked at Patricia, who smiled and shrugged. She asked why her father was chosen to help, so I explained about blood types. She immediately wanted to know if she could donate blood too when she's older. This was so typical of Emma. Even facing her own surgery, she was thinking about how she could help others. It was a trait that never ceased to amaze me, especially considering everything she'd been through in her young life. Dr. Martinez, Emma's pediatric cardiologist, appeared in our waiting area. He'd been overseeing Emma's care for the past 3 years and had become something of a family friend in the process. His face showed a mixture of professional concern and personal affection as he approached us. Grant, I heard what you did this morning, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Dr. Reeves told me you saved someone's life with your blood donation. That's incredible. Anyone would have done the same thing, I replied. But Dr. Martinez shook his head. Actually, that's not true. We've had emergencies before where we've asked families for blood donors, and most people are too stressed about their own situations to help. What you did was remarkable, especially considering what you and Emma are facing today. Emma beamed with pride. My dad's a hero, she announced matter-of-factly. He's always helping people. Dr. Martinez knelt down to Emma's level. And how are you feeling, Princess? Ready for your big day? I'm ready, Emma said with conviction. I've read all about The procedure, and I know Dr. Peterson is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the Southwest. Plus, Dad will be here when I wake up. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest and her complete trust in me. Emma had never known a life where I wasn't there to catch her when she fell, to advocate for her in medical appointments, to hold her hand through every scary moment. But the truth was, she'd been teaching me how to be brave long before I'd ever taught her. Mr. Shaw, Patricia said quietly, I hope you don't mind me asking, but Emma mentioned that she's adopted. I'm curious about how you prepared her for today's surgery. Her level of understanding and emotional maturity is extraordinary. I glanced at Emma, who was now showing Dr. Martinez her medical journal. Emma's birth mother left a note when she placed her for adoption. It said to tell Emma that she was loved from the very first moment. I've tried to raise her with that knowledge, that she was wanted, that every decision made about her life came from love, including the decision to have the surgery, Patricia observed. Especially that decision. We've been open about everything. From the beginning. Emma knows about her heart condition, understands the risks and benefits of the surgery, and participated in the decision to move forward. I never wanted her to feel like medical things were happening to her without her understanding why. Dr. Martinez rejoined our conversation. That approach has made a significant difference in Emma's emotional resilience. We see a lot of pediatric cardiac patients, and very few handle their medical journey with the grace that Emma shows. She gets that from her birth mother, I said without thinking, then paused. I mean, I assume she does. The strength to face difficult situations with courage, that seems too profound to just be learned. It feels innate. What I didn't say was that I often wondered about the woman who had written that note 9 years ago. What kind of person makes the decision to give up a daughter out of love? What kind of strength does that require? I'd raised Emma with endless admiration for her birth mother's sacrifice, but I'd never stopped being curious about who she was, what her life had become. Mr. Shaw, a new voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Dr. Reeves, the surgeon who had overseen the emergency transfusion. Earlier, I wanted to update you on the patient you helped this morning. Ms. Gibson is awake and stable. She asked me to find the donor who saved her life so she could thank them personally. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. Dad, can we meet her? I want to see the person whose life you saved. I looked at Dr. Martinez, who nodded. Emma doesn't go into surgery for another 30 minutes. If you'd like to make a quick visit, I think that would be fine. As we walked through the hospital corridors toward the recovery area, Emma peppered Dr. Reeves with questions about the patient's condition, the surgery that had gone wrong, and how blood transfusions worked. Her curiosity was infectious, and I found myself genuinely interested in meeting this woman whose life had intersected with ours so unexpectedly. She's in room 847, Dr. Reeves said as we approached the recovery wing. I should mention, she seems quite emotional about what happened. She kept saying that she doesn't understand why a stranger would help her when she's never helped anyone else. That comment struck me as odd. How could someone go through life without helping others? But then I remembered what Dr. Reeves had said earlier. She was here alone, no family, no emergency contacts. Maybe she'd lived a more isolated life than I could imagine. As we approached room 847, I had no way of knowing that I was about to meet the woman who had changed my entire world 9 years ago. The woman who had given me the greatest gift of my life, and who had never stopped thinking about the daughter she'd placed in my arms. What I learned about Savannah Gibson in the days that followed would forever change how I understood success, sacrifice, and the hidden pain that wealth and power can mask. But even in that first moment, as we approached her hospital room, I could sense that this was a woman carrying burdens far heavier than the medical crisis that had brought us together. Savannah Gibson was the CEO and founder of Phoenix Biome Solutions, one of the fastest-growing pharmaceutical companies in the Southwest. At 34, She had built an empire worth over $2 billion, specializing in breakthrough treatments for rare genetic disorders. Her company's headquarters occupied a gleaming 30-story tower in downtown Phoenix, where she commanded a workforce of over 8,000 employees across 12 countries. From her corner office on the 30th floor, Savannah could see the entire Phoenix metropolitan area spread out below her like a conquered territory. The walls were lined with awards: Entrepreneur of the Year, Forbes 40 Under 40, Time Magazine's Most Influential People in Healthcare. Her desk, a massive piece of Italian marble, held 3 computer monitors displaying real-time data from her company's global operations. But for all the trappings of success, Savannah's office told another story to those who looked closely enough. There were no family photos on her desk, no personal mementos, no signs that anyone else existed in her world. Her calendar was managed by 3 assistants working in shifts to accommodate her 18-hour workdays. She ate most of her meals at her desk, delivered by a rotating staff of personal chefs who prepared precisely calibrated nutrition plans designed to optimize her performance. Her penthouse apartment in the Biltmore district was equally impressive and equally empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the desert landscape, while museum-quality art hung on walls that had never heard laughter or conversation. The master bedroom contained a bed that was only used for sleep, never shared, never warmed by another person's presence. In 9 years of living there, Savannah had never hosted a dinner party, never had friends over for holidays, never experienced the simple pleasure of someone else's presence in her carefully curated space. What most people didn't know about Savannah Gibson was that every success, every achievement, every milestone in her remarkable career had been driven by a single devastating decision she'd made 9 years earlier. As a struggling graduate student at Arizona State University, drowning in student debt and facing homelessness, she had discovered she was pregnant. With no family support, no financial resources, and a future that seemed to demand an impossible choice between her education and motherhood, she had made the hardest decision of her life. She had carried her daughter for 9 months while completing her master's degree in biochemistry, working 3 part-time jobs to pay for prenatal care. During those months, she would sit in her cramped studio apartment, hands on her growing belly, reading scientific journals aloud to the life growing inside her. She talked to her unborn daughter about molecules and chemical reactions, about the dream she had for breakthrough treatments that could change the world. The day Emma was born, Savannah held her daughter for exactly 4 hours. She memorized every detail: the tiny fingers that grasped her thumb, the way her daughter's eyes seemed to focus on her face, the soft sounds she made when she was content. A nurse had taken a photograph, which Savannah kept hidden in her private safe at home, never displayed but never forgotten. Before placing Emma for adoption, Savannah had written a letter that she'd revised dozens of times. Please tell her she was loved from the very first moment. She had finally written, knowing that these words would be her only message to the daughter she would never know. She had chosen the adoptive family carefully, a young couple who desperately wanted a daughter who had stable jobs in a house with a yard and dreams of little league games and school plays. That decision had become the driving force behind everything that followed. Every late night in the laboratory, every risky business decision, every sacrifice of personal relationships in pursuit of professional success, it was all an attempt to become worthy of the daughter she had given away. She told herself that someday, when she had built something meaningful enough, when she had contributed something significant enough to the world, the pain of that separation might finally make sense. Phoenix Biome Solutions had emerged from her doctoral research into pediatric cardiac conditions, a focus that wasn't coincidental. While she would never know her daughter's medical history, Savannah had dedicated her career to developing treatments for the kinds of conditions that could affect any person. Her company's breakthrough therapies had saved thousands of lives. But none of that success could fill the void left by the daughter whose face she had memorized, but whose voice she would never hear. The gallbladder surgery that had gone so wrong was supposed to have been routine. A minor procedure to address a condition that Savannah had ignored for months while focused on her company's latest drug trials. She had arrived at the hospital alone, as she did everything in her life. No emergency contacts, no one to call if something went wrong, no hand to hold when the fear crept in. As the anesthesia had begun to take effect, Savannah's last conscious thought had been about the photograph hidden in her safe at home. If she didn't survive the surgery, no one would ever know about the daughter she had loved enough to give away. No one would understand that every achievement in her remarkable career had been an attempt to honor a decision made from love rather than abandon. She had awakened in the recovery room to learn that her life had been saved by a stranger, a single father who had stepped forward to donate blood while waiting for his own daughter's surgery. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, who had given up a daughter, had been saved by someone who was clearly an extraordinary father. As Grant Shaw and his daughter approached her hospital room, Savannah had no idea that she was about to meet the man who had raised her daughter with the love and stability she had dreamed of providing but couldn't. She had no idea that the brave, brilliant young girl beside him was the baby she had held for 4 precious hours 9 years ago. All she knew was that a stranger had saved her life, and for the first time in years she would have the opportunity to thank someone for an act of pure kindness. To understand how different my world was from Savannah Gibson's, you need to know that I measure wealth not in dollars, but in the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through our small apartment at 6 a.m. when she discovers something fascinating in her latest medical journal. You need to know that success, for me, isn't counted in business deals or awards, but in the moments when Emma feels safe enough to cry about her fears, knowing I'll hold her until the tears stop. I work as a high school biology teacher at Desert Ridge High School, about 15 minutes from our apartment. It's not glamorous work, and it certainly isn't lucrative, but it's meaningful in ways that Savannah's billion-dollar empire could never be. Every day, I have the privilege of watching teenagers discover that science isn't just textbook information. It's the explanation for how their own bodies work, how life creates itself, how the universe operates on both the largest and smallest scales. My classroom is decorated with Emma's artwork from over the years, mixed in with anatomical charts and periodic tables. My students know about Emma's medical journey because I've never hidden the challenges we face. When we study the cardiovascular system, I can explain heart defects not just from a textbook, but from the perspective of a father who has watched his daughter struggle with a condition that makes simple playground activities feel like marathons. Those students have become like extended family to us. When Emma was hospitalized for a week last year during a particularly difficult period, my classroom became a card-making factory. 17-year-olds who usually pretended to be too cool to care spent their lunch periods creating origami flowers and writing encouraging notes to a 9-year-old they'd never met but had heard about in stories. Our apartment is a modest 2-bedroom place in a complex that's seen better days, but it's filled with the kind of warmth that no amount of money can buy. The living room walls are covered with Emma's science fair projects, her artwork, photos of our weekend adventures to free museums and hiking trails. The kitchen table where we eat every meal together is scarred from years of Emma's craft projects and my evening grading sessions, but it's also where we've shared countless conversations about everything from molecular biology to her dreams of becoming a doctor. Emma's bedroom is her sanctuary. Half typical 9-year-old girl space with stuffed animals and books, half junior medical library with anatomy models and scientific journals. I've never restricted her curiosity about medical topics, even when other parents suggested it might be too much for someone her age. But Emma's condition has made her body a fascinating puzzle to solve rather than a burden to bear, and I've supported her natural inclination to understand what she's experiencing. My own bedroom is simpler: a bed, a dresser, and dozens of framed Photos documenting Emma's growth from the tiny 6-week-old baby I brought home to the remarkable young woman she's becoming. The nightstand drawer holds not just that precious envelope from her birth mother, but also letters from parents of my students, thank you notes from Emma's doctors, and birthday cards that Emma has made for me over the years. The truth is, we live paycheck to paycheck. Teaching doesn't pay enough to cover Emma's medical expenses, even with insurance. I work summers at a local tutoring center, and I've taken on weekend landscaping jobs when the medical bills pile up too high. But Emma has never gone without anything she truly needed, and I've made sure she never feels like her medical condition is a financial burden on our family. Our community has rallied around us in ways that constantly restore my faith in humanity. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, makes sure Emma has a hot meal waiting when I'm stuck in faculty meetings. The local children's hospital has a parent support group where I found friendship with other single parents navigating similar challenges. Even the mechanics at Tony's auto shop, where I take our aging Honda, always find ways to keep our car running safely without charging for every repair they should. This support network exists because we've never been too proud to accept help, and because I've always tried to give back when I can. I volunteer at the hospital's Family Resource Center, helping other parents understand their options when facing pediatric medical decisions. I tutor struggling students for free after school. When Mrs. Chun's grandson needed help with his college biology applications, Emma and I spent weeks helping him prepare. The contrast between my life and what I was learning about Savannah Gibson couldn't have been starker. Where she had isolated herself at the top of a corporate tower, surrounded by employees but no friends, Emma and I lived embedded in a community of people who genuinely cared about our well-being. Where she had accumulated wealth but no meaningful relationships, we had built a life rich in connection despite our financial limitations. But the most profound difference was in how we approached Emma's adoption. From the day I brought her home, I've talked openly about her birth mother as a hero who made an impossible choice out of love. Every year on Emma's birthday, we light a candle and say a prayer of gratitude for the woman who gave her life and then gave her the opportunity for a better future. I've raised Emma to understand that being adopted doesn't mean being unwanted. It means being so loved that someone was willing to sacrifice their own desires for her benefit. Emma has grown up knowing that somewhere in the world, a woman thinks about her and hopes she's happy. She's grown up understanding that love sometimes requires letting go, and that the most selfless gift anyone ever gave her was the chance to be my daughter. This knowledge has shaped her into someone who gives freely, loves deeply, and faces challenges with courage, what I couldn't have imagined, as we walked toward Savannah's hospital room that morning, was that I was about to meet the woman who had made all of this possible. The woman whose impossible decision had given me the privilege of being Emma's father, whose sacrifice had created the life we'd built together, whose love for her daughter had never diminished despite 9 years of separation. All I knew was that Emma was excited to meet the person whose life I had helped save, and that in a few minutes, we would all be in the same room together, for the first time since that day in the hospital when Savannah had placed her newborn daughter in my arms. To understand the miracle of what was about to happen in room 847, you need to know the story of how Emma came into my life, a story that began with another woman's impossible choice, and a series of events that seemed orchestrated by something far greater than coincidence. 9 years ago, I was a newlywed living with my wife, Rachel, in a small house in Tempe. We'd been trying to have a family for 3 years, when we learned that Rachel couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. The devastation of that diagnosis led us to explore adoption, and after months of paperwork, interviews, and waiting, we were approved by Arizona Family Services as potential adoptive parents. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was grading papers when Rachel burst through the front door, tears streaming down her face. For a terrifying moment, I thought something horrible had happened. Then she spoke the words that would change our lives forever. "There's a baby girl." Her birth mother chose us. The social worker, Mrs. Rodriguez, explained that the birth mother was a 25-year-old graduate student at ASU who had made the decision to place her daughter for adoption. She had been very specific about the type of family she wanted: educated parents who would value learning, people who would tell her daughter the truth about her origins, a stable home where her daughter could grow up knowing she was wanted. "She wrote you a letter," Mrs. Rodriguez had said, handing me a sealed envelope. "She wants you to read it when you're ready, and she hopes you'll share appropriate parts with her daughter someday." I remember holding that envelope with trembling hands, understanding that inside were the words of a woman whose heart was breaking, so that ours could be filled. Rachel and I read it together that night, both of us crying by the time we finished. The birth mother's love for her daughter radiated from every carefully chosen word. She explained that she was facing homelessness, had no family support, and was struggling to complete her education while working multiple jobs. But more than that, she wrote about her dreams for her daughter. "I want her to grow up in a house with books and laughter," she had written. "I want her to have parents who will encourage her curiosity, who will never let her doubt that she is loved and wanted. I want her to have opportunities that I cannot give her right now, but that I hope to create for other families someday through my work in science." The birth mother had requested that we wait until the baby was 6 weeks old before the adoption was finalized. During those weeks, she was caring for her daughter in a transitional housing program while completing her final semester. Mrs. Rodriguez explained that this was unusual. Most adoptions happened directly from the hospital, but the birth mother had wanted to ensure her daughter was healthy and that she herself was emotionally ready for the separation. On the day we met our daughter for the first time, Rachel and I drove to the social services office with a car seat we'd practiced installing dozens of times in Hearts, so full of anticipation we could barely speak. The birth mother had asked not to meet us in person, feeling it would make the separation too difficult. Instead, she had asked Mrs. Rodriguez to facilitate the transition. When Mrs. Rodriguez placed that 6-week-old baby in Rachel's arms, I watched my wife transform into a mother instantly. Emma, we had chosen the name together, not knowing that it was also the birth mother's choice, looked up at us with those serious brown eyes that already seemed to hold wisdom beyond her weeks. "Her birth mother wanted me to give you this," Mrs. Rodriguez said, handing me a small photograph. It showed the baby on the day she was born, tiny and perfect, with a handwritten note on the back. "Emma Rose, born March 14th, 3:47 a.m., 6 pounds 2 ounces. Loved from the very first moment." But it was the other item that truly broke my heart. Mrs. Rodriguez placed a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm on Emma's wrist. "Her birth mother bought this for her," she explained. "She said every little girl should have something beautiful that's just hers, and she hoped Emma would wear it whenever she needed to feel brave." Brave. That bracelet, the same one Emma wore to every medical appointment, had been chosen by the woman whose life I had just saved with my blood donation. What I learned later, through follow-up conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez, painted a picture of Emma's birth mother that made her sacrifice even more profound. She was brilliant, completing a graduate degree in biochemistry while working 3 jobs. She had spent her pregnancy reading scientific journals aloud to her unborn daughter, talking to her about molecules and discoveries, sharing her passion for understanding how life worked at its most fundamental level. She would have been an extraordinary mother, Mrs. Rodriguez had told us during one of our post-adoption check-ins. But she was mature enough to recognize that being extraordinary and being ready are not the same thing. She chose to give her daughter what she couldn't provide herself: stability, security, and a 2-parent home. The birth mother had also requested regular updates through the agency, photos and brief reports about Emma's development. We had sent these faithfully for the first 5 years, along with letters describing Emma's milestones, her personality, her health challenges when they arose. The agency had told us that the birth mother treasured these updates, but after Emma turned 5, she had requested that they stop. She said it was time to trust that you were the parents her daughter needed, Mrs. Rodriguez had explained. She didn't want to hold on to a relationship that might confuse Emma or interfere with her ability to see you as her true parents. When Rachel died suddenly when Emma was 2, I had briefly considered reaching out to Emma's birth mother through the agency. Not to disrupt our family, but to let her know that while Emma had lost one parent, she would never lack for love or support. Mrs. Rodriguez had gently discouraged this, explaining that the birth mother had specifically requested no contact unless Emma herself initiated it when she became an adult. She made this decision believing Emma would have 2 parents throughout her childhood, Mrs. Rodriguez had said. But she also chose you and Rachel because she believed you were strong enough to handle whatever challenges arose. Don't prove her wrong now. Those words had sustained me through the darkest period of single parenthood. Whenever I doubted whether I was enough for Emma, I remembered that somewhere in Phoenix, a woman had looked at me and Rachel and decided we were worthy of raising her most precious gift. That trust had become a sacred responsibility. As Emma grew, I began to see traces of the woman who had given her life. Emma's scientific curiosity, her ability to face medical challenges with remarkable courage, her instinct to help others even when she was struggling herself. These seemed like inherited traits from someone who had made career choices based on helping families like ours. Now, as we approached room 847, I realized I was about to thank the woman who had saved a stranger's life while I was preparing to meet the person whose life I had saved. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. What I didn't know was that the woman in that hospital bed had spent 9 years building a pharmaceutical empire focused on treating the exact type of heart condition that Emma had been born with. I didn't know that every breakthrough her company achieved was motivated by thoughts of a daughter she had placed in the arms of strangers, hoping they would love her enough to help her overcome any obstacle, and I definitely didn't know that. Savannah Gibson, the CEO whose life I had saved that morning, was about to see her daughter for the first time since she had kissed her goodbye 9 years ago. When we walked into room 847, I expected to meet a grateful patient who would thank me for the blood donation and send us on our way. What I found instead was a woman who would change our lives in ways I never could have imagined, though. Neither of us understood why we felt such an immediate, inexplicable connection. Savannah Gibson was sitting up in her hospital bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who had nearly died hours earlier. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without the corporate attire and makeup I would later associate with her public persona. She looked younger, more vulnerable. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. They were Emma's eyes, the same deep brown, the same intensity, the same spark of intelligence that I saw in my daughter every day. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice still slightly hoarse from the anesthesia. "Dr. Reeves told me you saved my life this morning. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," I replied, stepping closer to her bed. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Savannah shook her head slowly. "No, they wouldn't have. I know that for a fact." Her gaze shifted to Emma, who was standing beside me with her characteristic mixture of curiosity and shyness. "And you must be Emma. Dr. Reeves mentioned you're having surgery today too." Emma stepped forward with the confidence that always amazed me. "Yes, ma'am. I'm having my mitral valve repaired. Dad donated blood to help you because we have the same rare blood type, AB negative. That makes us special because we can help lots of people in emergencies." Something flickered across Savannah's face at Emma's words. Recognition? Surprise? But it was gone so quickly I almost missed it. "You're very brave," she said softly. "Are you nervous about your surgery?" "A little," Emma admitted, "but I've read all about the procedure. Knowledge helps reduce fear. That's what Dad always says." Plus, Dr. Peterson is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the Southwest. Savannah's expression grew even more intent. Pediatric cardiac surgery, she repeated slowly. That's a very specialized field. Emma was born with a heart condition, I explained. This surgery should fix the problem completely. We've been preparing for it for months. March 14th, Emma added matter-of-factly. That's when I was born. And that's when Dr. Peterson scheduled my surgery. He said it was fitting to fix my heart on the anniversary of when it started beating. The blood drained from Savannah's face. I watched her grip the bed rail, her knuckles turning white. March 14th, she whispered. Is everything okay? I asked, concerned by her sudden pallor. Should I call a nurse? No, I'm fine, she said quickly, though she clearly wasn't. It's just ... Today is March 14th. What are the odds that your daughter would have surgery on her birthday? Emma brightened. Dad says the universe likes neat patterns. Like how we both have the same blood type, and how you needed help the same day I needed courage. I watched Savannah study Emma's face with an intensity that seemed far beyond polite interest. When Emma absently touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, her lucky charm for medical procedures, Savannah's breath caught audibly. That's a beautiful bracelet, Savannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma looked down at her wrist and smiled. My birth mother chose it for me. Dad says she wanted me to have something beautiful that was just mine, something to help me feel brave. I wear it to all my medical appointments. The silence that followed was profound. Savannah stared at the bracelet with an expression I couldn't interpret. Longing, recognition, pain. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Your birth mother sounds like a very wise woman. She is, Emma said with absolute conviction. Dad tells me stories about her sometimes. She was really smart, studying science in college. She loved me so much that she wanted me to have parents who could give me a better life than she could at the time. Dad says that's the most beautiful kind of love, when you want something good for someone, even if it makes you sad. I watched tears gather in Savannah's eyes, though she fought to control them. Your father is right, she managed. That is the most beautiful kind of love. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. Emma, it's time to get you ready for surgery. Emma turned to Savannah with the earnest expression she wore when something was important to her. I hope you feel better soon, Ms. Gibson, and I hope you have people who love you taking care of you. Thank you. Sweetheart, Savannah replied, her voice breaking slightly on the words. I hope your surgery goes perfectly, as we prepared to leave. Emma surprised everyone by approaching Savannah's bed and gently placing a small origami crane on her bedside table. I made this morning while we were waiting, she said. It's for good luck. Dad taught me that when we help each other, good things happen. After Emma was taken to pre-op, I returned to Savannah's room to check on her. She was holding the origami crane, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said when she saw me. Your daughter is just... She's extraordinary. She is, I agreed, sitting in the chair beside her bed. But you seem upset. Did something we said ... No, she said quickly, then paused. Actually, yes. But not in the way you might think. She looked at me with an expression I would later recognize as someone wrestling with a monumental decision. Mr. Shaw, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Emma mentioned she was adopted. Do you mind me asking ... how long ago? She came to us when she was 6 weeks old, I said. 9 years ago this week, actually. My wife and I had been waiting for her for months. Savannah's hands trembled as she set down the origami crane. 9 years ago this week. She repeated ... yes. Emma was born on March 14th, and we brought her home in early April. It was the happiest day of our lives. I paused, studying her face. Why do you ask? I ... she started, then stopped. I was just curious. She seemed so loved, so confident. Her adoption was clearly a success story. Over the next several hours, while Emma was in surgery, I found myself returning to Savannah's room repeatedly. Something about her drew me back, partly gratitude for expressing such genuine interest in Emma, partly concern for her obvious emotional state, and partly something I couldn't name. Each time I visited, our conversations grew deeper, more personal. She told me about her company, about the work they did developing treatments for rare genetic conditions. When I mentioned that Emma's heart condition was somewhat unusual, she listened with the focused attention of someone for whom every detail mattered. She asked thoughtful questions about Emma's medical history, her development, her interests. She's fascinated by science, I told her during one visit. Always has been. Even as a toddler, she preferred books about how things work to fairy tales. That's remarkable for someone so young, Savannah said. Does she want to be a doctor? She says she wants to help other kids with heart problems. She thinks if she understands her own condition well enough, she can help doctors find better treatments. Something in Savannah's expression shifted, pride mixed with sorrow. She sounds like she has the mind of a researcher, she said softly. Someone who sees problems as puzzles to solve rather than obstacles to endure. Exactly, I said, surprised by how precisely she had captured Emma's approach to life. Sometimes I wonder if she inherited that perspective. Her birth mother was studying biochemistry when she placed Emma for adoption. I've always thought Emma's scientific curiosity might have come from her. Savannah was quiet for a long moment. What do you know about her birth mother? Not much, I admitted. The adoption was fairly closed. We know she was a graduate student, very young, facing some difficult circumstances. She wrote us a letter explaining her decision, and the social worker told us she was brilliant, but struggling financially. She made it clear that she loved Emma but wanted her to have opportunities she couldn't provide. Do you ever think about her? Savannah asked quietly. Every day, I said without hesitation. Emma and I talk about her regularly. We're grateful to her, not just for giving us Emma, but for making such a selfless choice. Every year on Emma's birthday, we light a candle and say a prayer of thanks for the woman who loved her enough to let her go. Tears were flowing freely down Savannah's face now, though she didn't seem aware of them. That's beautiful, she whispered. Emma knows she's loved by 3 parents. I continued. Her birth mother who gave her life and chose us to raise her, my late wife Rachel who adopted her and loved her fiercely, and me. We've never let her feel like being adopted made her any less wanted or loved. When Dr. Peterson finally came to tell me that Emma's surgery had been a complete success, I invited Savannah to come with me to see her in recovery. I expected her to politely decline, but instead, she asked if she could get dressed and walk with me. Emma was groggy from the anesthesia, but alert enough to smile when she saw us approach her bed. Dad, she said sleepily, did Miss Gibson come? To check on me. I wanted to make sure you were okay, Savannah said, her voice thick with emotion. How do you feel? Like my heart is brand new, Emma replied with a drowsy smile. Dr. Peterson said the surgery went perfectly. I'll be able to run and play like other kids now. Savannah reached out hesitantly, then gently touched Emma's hand. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. Will you visit me while I'm recovering? Emma asked. I'd like to hear more about your science work. If your father doesn't mind, I'd love to visit you, Savannah replied, looking at me for permission. Of course, I said, though I was puzzled by the intensity of her interest in Emma. We'd enjoy the company. As we stood there beside Emma's hospital bed, watching her drift back to sleep, I had no idea that I was witnessing the beginning of a bond that would transform all our lives. I didn't understand why Savannah seemed so emotionally invested in a patient's daughter she'd just met, or why she looked at Emma with an expression of wonder mixed with heartbreak. What I did know was that Emma had touched something deep in this successful, powerful woman, something that had been buried for a long time. And somehow, witnessing Emma's courage and joy seemed to be healing a wound in Savannah that I didn't yet understand she carried. The growing connection between them felt natural, inevitable, as if they had been meant to find each other. Which, of course, they had been, 9 years ago, when a young woman made the hardest decision of her life and chose to trust strangers with her most precious gift. The revelation came to Savannah first, and I'll never forget the moment I watched 9 years of carefully controlled composure shatter in the space of a single heartbeat. It happened 3 days after Emma's surgery, during what I thought was just another friendly visit to check on both of our recoveries. Emma had been discharged the day before and was resting comfortably at home, but Savannah had asked if we could visit her once more before she was released. I thought it was sweet. The successful businesswoman had clearly been touched by my daughter's spirit, and Emma had been asking about Ms. Gibson every few hours since we'd left the hospital. We found Savannah sitting by her window, staring out at the Phoenix skyline with an expression I couldn't read. She'd been quiet during our previous visits, almost contemplative, as if she was working through some internal puzzle. When she saw Emma approaching with a new origami creation, this time a colorful butterfly, her face lit up with the kind of joy that seemed almost painful in its intensity. "I made this one with the art supplies you sent to my room," Emma said, presenting the butterfly with pride. "The nurse told me you arranged for them to be delivered." "Thank you." Savannah had indeed sent art supplies to Emma's room, along with several advanced science books that were technically above Emma's reading level, but which she had devoured anyway. It was an unusually generous gesture from someone who had known us for only a few days, but Emma had been delighted by the gifts. "You're very welcome, sweetheart," Savannah said, accepting the butterfly with reverent care. "It's beautiful. You're incredibly talented." Emma beamed at the praise, then settled into the chair beside Savannah's bed with the comfortable ease she'd developed around this woman who seemed to understand her in ways that surprised even me. "Ms. Gibson, can I ask you something?" "Anything," Savannah replied, and I noticed she leaned forward slightly, as if whatever Emma wanted to know was the most important question in the world. "Do you have any kids?" The question hit Savannah like a physical blow. I watched her face cycle through a dozen emotions in seconds: pain, longing, fear, love, loss. When she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. I had a daughter once. A long time ago." Emma's expression softened with the empathy that always amazed me. "What happened to her?" "I had to let her go," Savannah said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I wanted her to have a better life than I could give her at the time. Like my birth mother," Emma said gently. "She loved me enough to let me go too. Dad says that's the most beautiful kind of love. When you want something good for someone, even if it makes you sad." The words seemed to break something inside Savannah. She turned away from us, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I moved to comfort her, but Emma was already there, placing her small hand on Savannah's arm with the gentle confidence of someone who had comforted many crying adults in hospital settings. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "I didn't mean to make you sad. But if it helps, I think about my birth mother every day, and I'm not sad about what she did. I'm grateful. Because of her choice, I got to have the best dad in the world, and she got to know that I was safe and loved." Savannah looked at Emma through her tears, studying her face with an intensity that had grown stronger with each visit. What do you know about your birth mother?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Lots of things," Emma said, settling back in her chair as if preparing to share her favorite story. "She was really smart, like you. She was studying science in college, biochemistry, I think Dad said. She was young and didn't have much money, but she worked really hard and dreamed of helping people through her research." Savannah's breathing became shallow, quick. "What else?" "She was brave," Emma continued. "Dad says she carried me for 9 months while finishing school and working 3 jobs. She talked to me before I was born. read science books out loud so I would hear her voice and know about the things she loved. How do you know that? Savannah whispered. The social worker told Dad and Rachel. That's my other mom who died when I was little. She said my birth mother used to sit in her tiny apartment and explain molecules and chemical reactions to me while I was still in her tummy. Dad thinks that's why I love science so much. Each detail Emma shared seemed to physically impact Savannah. She gripped the bed rail so tightly her knuckles were white, and I could see her pulse racing in her neck. Something was wrong, but I couldn't understand what. Emma, Savannah said, her voice barely audible. What agency handled your adoption? Arizona Family Services, Emma replied promptly. Mrs. Rodriguez was our social worker. She was really nice. She said my birth mother was very careful about choosing my parents because she wanted to make sure I would be loved and have opportunities to learn. Savannah's face had gone ashen. Mrs. Rodriguez, she repeated mechanically. Do you know her? Emma asked with interest. She retired last year, but she still sends me birthday cards. I watched Savannah struggle to breathe, watched her hands shake as she reached for something on her bedside table. It was her phone, and she was scrolling through it with desperate urgency, as if searching for something crucial. Emma, she said, her voice cracking. What day were you born? March 14th, Emma said cheerfully. That's why it was so perfect that I had my surgery on my birthday. Dr. Peterson said it was like giving my heart a birthday present. Savannah made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She found what she was looking for on her phone and stared at the screen with an expression of shock, so profound I started to worry she was having another medical emergency. Savannah, are you okay? I asked, moving closer. Should I call a nurse? She looked up at me with eyes wide with disbelief and recognition. Grant, she whispered. What time was Emma born? The question seemed random, but something in her tone made me answer. 3:47 in the morning. March 14th, 2015. She weighed 6 pounds 2 ounces. I paused, studying her face. Why? Savannah's phone slipped from her trembling hands. On the screen, I glimpsed what looked like a photograph of a newborn baby before the device clattered to the floor. Because, she said, her voice breaking completely, that's exactly when and where and how much my daughter weighed when she was born. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emma looked confused, glancing between Savannah and me as if waiting for one of us to explain what was happening. But I was frozen, my mind struggling to process what Savannah had just said. Your daughter? I managed. Savannah reached with shaking hands for her purse on the bedside table. From inside, she pulled out a worn photograph, the same photograph I kept in my knitstand drawer at home. The same baby, the same hospital bracelet, the same handwritten notation on the back. Emma Rose, she whispered, reading from the back of the photo. Born March 14th, 2015, 3:47 a.m., 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She looked up at Emma with tears streaming down her face. Loved from the very first moment. Emma's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. She looked at the photograph, then at Savannah, then at me. That's the same picture Dad has at home, she said slowly. Because we're the same person. Sweetheart, Savannah whispered. I'm your birth mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stared at Savannah with an expression of wonder and disbelief, while I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The woman whose life I had saved with my blood donation. The CEO who had shown such inexplicable interest in my daughter. The person who had been moved to tears by Emma's courage. She was the woman who had written the letter I treasured, who had chosen the bracelet Emma wore, who had trusted me with her most precious gift. You're her, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You're the woman who wrote the letter. Savannah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. You chose the bracelet. I continued, pieces falling into place with staggering clarity. You talked to Emma about science while she was in the womb. You picked us to be her parents. I did, she managed. I chose you because I could see in your interview that you would love her the way she deserved to be loved. I chose you because I knew you would tell her the truth about her adoption, and because you promised to help her reach for her dreams. Emma, with the incredible adaptability of a 9-year-old, was the first to move. She stood up slowly and approached Savannah's bed with the same gentle confidence she'd shown all week. Are you really my birth mother? She asked, her voice full of wonder rather than confusion. I am, Savannah whispered. And Dad saved your life with his blood donation? He did. Emma considered this information with the serious expression she wore when working through complex problems. So Dad gave you blood to save your life, and you gave him me to make his life better? The simple clarity of her observation broke through my shock. I watched Savannah's face transform as Emma's words sank in. This 9-year-old had just summarized the cosmic justice of what had happened between us. Suppose that's exactly what happened, Savannah said, reaching out tentatively to touch Emma's hand. Emma took her hand without hesitation. Does this mean I get to have 3 parents now instead of just 2? She asked. Because Dad always said my birth mother loved me too, and now I get to actually meet her? The hope in Emma's voice, the pure acceptance and joy, seemed to heal something fundamental in Savannah. I watched years of pain and guilt melt away as she realized that her daughter wasn't angry or confused about the adoption. She was grateful for it. If that's what you want, Savannah whispered, then yes. You get to have 3 parents who love you more than anything in the world. That's what I want, Emma said firmly. Then, with the directness that was so characteristically hers, she asked, Can I hug you? I've always wanted to hug my birth mother. Savannah's answer was to pull Emma into the first embrace they'd shared since the day she was born. I watched them hold each other, my daughter and the woman who had made my daughter possible, and understood that I was witnessing something miraculous. The impossible had happened. Through a series of events so unlikely they seemed orchestrated by fate itself, we had found each other. The woman who had saved our family 9 years ago had been saved by our family in return. The circle was complete, but even as I marveled at the extraordinary nature of our reunion, I could see in Savannah's eyes that the revelation, while joyful, was also terrifying for her. She had spent 9 years building walls around her heart to protect herself from the pain of separation. Now those walls were crumbling, and she was terrified of what that meant for all of us. For exactly 48 hours, we experienced something that felt like a miracle. Emma had found her birth mother. I had met the woman who had trusted me with the greatest gift of my life, and Savannah had been reunited with the daughter she had never stopped loving. For 2 days, it seemed like the universe had conspired to heal wounds that we thought were permanent, to create a family that was somehow even more complete than any of us had dared to imagine. And then fear destroyed everything it started with. Small signs that I initially attributed to the overwhelming nature of our situation. On the 2nd day after the revelation, when Emma and I visited Savannah in the hospital, she seemed more subdued, more distant. Where before she had hung on Emma's every word, now she appeared distracted, almost anxious. When Emma showed her a drawing she had made of the 3 of us together, stick figures holding hands with my family, written in careful 9-year-old handwriting, Savannah's smile seemed forced, painful. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she said. But I noticed she didn't ask to keep it the way she had treasured every other small gift Emma had offered. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she surprised me with a question that revealed how perceptive she had always been. Dad, is Savannah scared of something? What makes you ask that, Em? She seems sad when she looks at me now. Like when you look at pictures of Rachel, happy and sad at the same time, but more sad. Emma's observation troubled me more than I wanted to admit. I had noticed the change in Savannah too, but I had hoped I was imagining it. The joy and wonder that had filled her face when she first realized Emma was her daughter had been gradually replaced by something that looked increasingly like panic. The next morning, when we arrived at the hospital for what was supposed to be Savannah's discharge day, we found her room empty. A nurse at the station informed us that Ms. Gibson had checked herself out against medical advice at 6 a.m. before visiting hours had even begun. "She left this for you," the nurse said, handing me a sealed envelope with Emma's name written on it in Savannah's careful handwriting. Emma and I sat in the hospital cafeteria while she read the letter aloud, her voice growing smaller with each sentence. "Dear Emma," she began, "I want you to know that meeting you has been the greatest gift of my life. You are everything I dreamed you would become: smart, kind, brave, and loved. You have a wonderful father who has given you everything I hoped for when I made the decision to place you for adoption 9 years ago. I need you to understand that decision wasn't made lightly then, and the decision I'm making now isn't made lightly either. Your life with your father is perfect. You are happy, healthy, and surrounded by love. You have a community that supports you, a father who would do anything for you, and a future full of possibilities. I am a complication you don't need. I spent 9 years learning how to live without you, and you've spent 9 years building a beautiful life that doesn't include me. Adding me to that life now would only create confusion and disruption for everyone involved. Please know that I will always love you, that I will always be grateful for the brief time we had together this week, and that I will spend the rest of my life cherishing the knowledge that you are happy and loved. But I think it's best if we return to our separate lives now, before we create more complications than healing. Be happy, my beautiful daughter. You have everything you need to become everything you're meant to be. All my love, Savannah." By the time Emma finished reading, tears were streaming down both our faces. But where my tears came from anger and disbelief, Emma's came from pure heartbreak. "She's leaving again," Emma whispered. "Just like before, except this time I got to know her first." The devastation in her voice ignited a protective fury in me that I had rarely experienced. How dare Savannah do this to Emma? How dare she reopen wounds that had healed, create hope that she then shattered, make Emma feel abandoned all over again? "Dad," Emma said, looking up at me with those wise brown eyes that now reminded me painfully of the woman who had just abandoned her again. "Did I do something wrong? Did I say something that made her not want to be my mom?" "No, baby," I said, pulling her close. "You didn't do anything wrong." Savannah is scared, and sometimes when adults get scared, they make bad decisions that hurt the people they love. But even as I comforted Emma, I struggled to understand Savannah's reasoning. The woman I had spent a week getting to know had shown nothing but love and delight in Emma's presence. She had been moved to tears by Emma's courage, amazed by her intelligence, and visibly healed by the knowledge that her daughter was thriving. What could have changed so dramatically that she would choose to walk away from the miracle we had all experienced? That afternoon, I called Phoenix Biome Solutions and asked to speak with Savannah. Her assistant informed me that Ms. Gibson was unavailable and would be traveling on business indefinitely. I tried her personal cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. I even drove to her company's headquarters and attempted to see her in person, only to be told by security that Ms. Gibson was not in the building and they couldn't provide any information about when she might return. Emma's reaction to this second abandonment was somehow worse than if Savannah had never been found at all. For 9 years, Emma had carried an idealized image of her birth mother as a hero who had made a sacrifice out of love. Now she had to reconcile that image with a woman who had chosen to leave her not once, but twice. The worst part was watching Emma blame herself. Despite my repeated assurances that Savannah's decision had nothing to do with anything Emma had said or done, my daughter began second-guessing every interaction they'd had. Maybe I asked too many questions about science, she would say. Maybe she thought I was too nerdy. Maybe I shouldn't have made her those origami animals. Maybe she thought they were babyish. Maybe she realized I'm not as smart as she thought I would be. Each self-doubt broke my heart a little more. Emma had approached the reunion with her birth mother with the same open courage she brought to everything else in her life, and now that courage had been rewarded with rejection. I watched her confidence crumble, saw her retreat into herself in ways that reminded me of the darkest days after Rachel's death. The impact extended beyond just Emma's emotional well-being. Her recovery from surgery, which had been progressing beautifully, seemed to stall. She complained of chest pain that the doctors couldn't find a physical cause for. She stopped asking questions during her follow-up appointments, no longer curious about the medical procedures that had always fascinated her. She picked at her food and had trouble sleeping, waking up several times each night from dreams she couldn't or wouldn't describe. 3 weeks after Savannah's disappearance, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside during one of Emma's checkups. "Grant, I'm concerned about Emma's emotional state," he said. "Her physical recovery is fine, but she's showing signs of depression. Can you tell me what happened? 3 weeks ago, she was the happiest I'd ever seen her. Now she seems like a different child." Found myself in the impossible position of explaining to Emma's doctor that her birth mother had found us, bonded with us, and then disappeared again out of some misguided sense of protection. Dr. Martinez listened with growing concern and anger. "Let me understand this correctly," he said when I finished. "This woman inserted herself into Emma's life during one of the most vulnerable times right around major surgery, formed an emotional bond with her, and then disappeared without explanation." "She left a letter," I said weakly. "A letter that basically told Emma she was a complication that wasn't worth the trouble." Dr. Martinez replied sharply. "Grant, this woman has traumatized your daughter. Whatever her reasons, her actions have caused Emma significant psychological harm." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. In my anger at Savannah for abandoning Emma again, I had focused on the betrayal rather than the deeper damage she had caused. Emma hadn't just lost her birth mother twice. She had lost her faith in the love that had sustained her through every previous challenge. Meanwhile, I was learning more about Savannah's sudden departure through news reports and business publications. Phoenix Biome Solutions stock had dropped significantly after their CEO had unexpectedly canceled major meetings and disappeared from public view. Industry analysts were speculating about a hostile takeover, a personal scandal, or a serious health crisis. None of them could have imagined that Savannah Gibson had voluntarily walked away from everything because she was terrified of disrupting a 9-year-old's life. Through a mutual contact at the hospital, I learned that Savannah had checked herself into a private medical facility in Sedona, ostensibly for stress-related treatment following her surgical complications. But the doctor who shared this information with me suggested it was more of a voluntary retreat from reality than a medical necessity. "She's running away," Dr. Reeves told me during a chance encounter in the hospital elevator. "Whatever happened between you three after I introduced you, it scared her enough that she's hiding from the world. She's scared of being a complication in Emma's life," I explained. "She thinks walking away is the noble thing to do." Dr. Reeves shook his head. "The noble thing would have been to never insert herself into your lives in the first place, or to stay and work through whatever challenges arose. This halfway approach is just cowardice dressed up as sacrifice." His words echoed my own thoughts, but they didn't help me figure out how to repair the damage Savannah had caused. Emma was spiraling into a depression that no amount of reassurance seemed to touch. She had stopped creating origami animals, stopped asking scientific questions, stopped believing in the fundamental goodness that had always been her defining characteristic. One night, about a month after Savannah's disappearance, I found Emma sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the lights of Phoenix with a blank expression that terrified me. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" I asked, sitting beside her on the window seat. "I was wondering if she ever really loved me," Emma said quietly. or if she just felt guilty about giving me away and wanted to feel better about herself. The sophisticated psychological insight in her words reminded me that Emma had always been older than her years, but this particular wisdom was born from pain rather than natural maturity. She loved you. I could see it in her face every time she looked at you. Then why did she leave again? Emma asked, finally turning to look at me. If she really loved me, wouldn't she want to be part of my life? It was the question I had been asking myself every day since reading Savannah's letter. How could someone who claimed to love Emma choose to abandon her twice? How could the same woman who had carefully chosen Emma's adoptive parents, who had spent a week delighting in her daughter's presence, decide that love meant walking away? Sometimes people get scared of how much they love someone, I said, trying to find an explanation that would make sense to a 9-year-old heart. Sometimes they think protecting someone means staying away from them. That's stupid, Emma said with uncharacteristic bitterness. Love is supposed to make you want to be closer to someone, not farther away. Her words contained a truth that cut straight through all of Savannah's elaborate justifications. Emma, with the clear vision of a person who had been raised in love, understood something that Savannah had lost sight of. Real love means showing up, even when it's scary, even when it's complicated, even when you're not sure you're doing the right thing. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, I realized that Savannah's decision to walk away had damaged more than just our family. It had reinforced every fear she had carried for 9 years about not being worthy of love, about being unable to provide stability, about being a complication rather than a blessing. By choosing to leave again, she had proven to herself that she was exactly the kind of person who abandons people she loves. The terrible irony was that in trying to protect Emma from disruption and uncertainty, Savannah had caused exactly the kind of trauma she was trying to prevent. In attempting to preserve the perfect life she thought Emma had with me, she had introduced chaos, heartbreak, and doubt into a situation that had been stable and secure. The worst part was knowing that somewhere in Sedona, Savannah was probably telling herself that she had done the right thing, that Emma would be better off without her, that walking away was just another form of the same selfless love that had led her to place Emma for adoption 9 years earlier. But there was nothing selfless about what she had done this time. This time, she had put her own fear and guilt ahead of Emma's needs. This time, she had taken the easy way out instead of doing the hard work of figuring out how to build a relationship that honored both the family Emma already had and the mother she had just found. As I lay awake that night, listening to Emma toss and turn in the next room, I realized that if we were going to heal from this, someone was going to have to find the courage that Savannah had lost. Someone was going to have to fight for the family that had been so briefly, beautifully possible. And that someone, I realized, was going to have to be me. Finding Savannah Gibson took every resource I had, every favor I could call in, and a determination that surprised even me. But as I watched Emma retreat further into herself each day, as I saw the bright, curious girl I had raised disappearing behind walls of hurt and self-doubt, I knew I had to do something that Savannah couldn't do for herself. I had to fight for our family. The private medical facility in Sedona, where Savannah had checked herself in, was more of a luxury retreat than a hospital, the kind of place where wealthy people went to hide from problems that money couldn't solve. Getting past their privacy policies and security measures required every ounce of teacher creativity and stubborn persistence I possessed. I had to convince them that I was family, which in every way that mattered, I was. I drove up to Sedona on a Saturday morning, leaving Emma with Mrs. Chun after explaining that I had some important business to take care of. Emma had looked at me with those 2 wise eyes and asked, "Are you going to find Savannah?" "I'm going to try, sweetheart." "Are you going to tell her she's being stupid?" Emma asked with a small smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "I'm going to tell her that love means showing up," I replied, echoing her own words back to her. The facility was nestled in the red rocks outside Sedona, all adobe walls and carefully manicured gardens designed to promote healing and reflection. I found Savannah in what the staff called the meditation garden, sitting alone on a bench overlooking the desert landscape. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the weight of regret she was carrying. She saw me approaching and didn't try to run, though something in her posture suggested she wanted to. Instead, she waited, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of carefully controlled composure that I recognized as her defense mechanism. "Grant," she said quietly when I sat down beside her. "How did you find me?" "When you love someone enough, you learn to be resourceful," I said, deliberately echoing the theme that had brought us all together. "Emma needs you to come home." Savannah closed her eyes as if my words caused physical pain. "Emma is better off without me. She has you. She has her community. She has everything she needs for a stable, happy life. I'm just a complication that would disrupt all of that. Do you know what Emma asked me the night after you left?" I said, turning to face her directly. "She asked me if she had done something wrong to make you not want to be her mom." "A 9-year-old child is blaming herself for your fear." The words hit Savannah like physical blows. I watched her composure crack, saw tears gather in her eyes despite her attempts to maintain control. "That's exactly why I had to leave," she said desperately. "I'm already causing her pain. I'm already disrupting her sense of security. The longer I stayed, the more damage I would have done." "The damage was done when you left," I said firmly. "Savannah, Emma isn't some fragile creature who needs to be protected from complexity. She's your daughter, brilliant, resilient, and capable of understanding far more than you give her credit for. She doesn't need a perfect life. She needs authentic relationships with people who love her enough to work through difficulties." Savannah shook her head, her voice rising with desperation. "You don't understand. I don't know how to be a mother. I gave up that right 9 years ago. I built my entire life around the decision to let her go. I don't know how to suddenly be part of a family." "Neither did I said simply. "When Rachel died and I became a single father overnight, I had no idea what I was doing. I was terrified every day that I wasn't enough for Emma, that I would somehow fail her. But you know what I learned? Love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up anyway." I pulled out my phone and showed her a video I had taken the week before. Emma in her bedroom, listlessly moving origami paper around without folding it, staring out the window with the same hollow expression I'd seen too often lately. "This is what your protection looks like," I said, watching Savannah's face crumple as she saw Emma's obvious depression. "This is what happens when someone Emma loves decides she's not worth fighting for. I am fighting for her." Savannah protested weakly. "I'm staying away so she can have the stability she deserves." "You're fighting for your own fear," I corrected. "You're choosing the easy path because it allows you to maintain the narrative you've built about yourself, that you're someone who has to sacrifice her own happiness for Emma's good. But that's not what Emma needs from you anymore." I stood up from the bench, needing to move as the weight of what I was about to say settled over me. "Savannah, 9 years ago, you made an impossible choice out of love. You gave Emma to us because you believed we could provide something you couldn't. And you were right. We gave her stability, security, and unconditional love. But Emma isn't that helpless baby anymore. She's a remarkable young woman who has room in her heart for more love, not less." Savannah looked up at me with an expression of desperate hope mixed with terror. "What if I mess it up? What if I can't figure out how to be part of your family without disrupting everything you've built?" "Then we'll figure it out together," I said. "Savannah, you're not being asked to replace anything or anyone. Rachel will always be Emma's mom, the woman who adopted her and loved her for the first 2 years of her life. I will always be her dad, the man who has raised her and will continue to be her primary parent. But Emma has enough love in her Heart for a birth mother, too, if that birth mother is brave enough to accept it. I sat back down and pulled out the envelope I had brought with me, the one containing the letter Savannah had written 9 years ago, the letter I had treasured and shared with Emma countless times. "Do you remember what you wrote in this letter?" I asked, unfolding the worn pages. "You wrote that you wanted Emma to grow up in a house with books and laughter. You wanted her to have parents who would encourage her curiosity and never let her doubt that she was loved. You wanted her to have opportunities that you couldn't provide at the time, but that you hoped to create for other families someday through your work in science." Savannah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "You've accomplished everything you dreamed of," I continued. "You've built a company that develops treatments for conditions like Emma's. You've created opportunities for thousands of families. You've become exactly the kind of person you hoped to be when you wrote this letter. Emma doesn't need you to sacrifice yourself for her anymore. She needs you to share yourself with her." I reached into my pocket and pulled out something else. The origami butterfly Emma had made for Savannah. "The one she had refused to take when she left," Emma asked. "Me to give this back to you," I said, placing the delicate paper creation in Savannah's hands. "She said if you ever get brave enough to come home, she wants you to have it as a reminder that beautiful things can be created from simple materials, if you're patient and gentle with them." Savannah held the butterfly like it was made of the most precious substance on earth, her tears falling onto the colorful paper. "She also asked me to tell you something," I continued. "She said that if being her birth mother is too scary, maybe you could just start by being her friend. She said friends show up for each other even when things are complicated." The simple wisdom of Emma's words seemed to break through the last of Savannah's defenses. She doubled over, sobbing with the force of 9 years of suppressed grief, fear, and love finally being released. "I've been so afraid," she whispered between sobs. "So afraid of not being enough, of disrupting her life, of loving her too much, or not enough. I've been afraid that if I let myself be her mother, I wouldn't be able to handle it if something went wrong. Something already went wrong," I said gently. "You left and we survived it. Emma is resilient because she learned resilience from you, from the courage it took to choose adoption, and from me, from watching me navigate single parenthood. She can handle having a relationship with you. The question is whether you can handle having a relationship with her." Savannah looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What would that even look like? How do we build a relationship when I don't know how to be a mother and she already has a father, who is everything she needs?" "We start small," I said. "We start with honesty. We tell Emma that you were scared and made a mistake. We tell her that you're willing to try being part of her life if she's willing to try having you in it. We figure out what role makes sense. For you, maybe it's the science mentor who teaches her about research. Maybe it's the friend who shares her love of origami. Maybe it's the birth mother who can answer questions about where she came from. I paused, watching understanding dawn in Savannah's eyes. "But we do it together," I continued. "Emma has been very clear that she wants 3 parents who love her. She doesn't see you as a complication or a threat to her relationship with me. She sees you as a missing piece of her family that she's finally found." "What about you?" Savannah asked quietly. "How do you feel about sharing Emma with the person who gave birth to her?" The question got to the heart of everything I had been processing over the past few weeks. "Savannah, you gave me the greatest gift of my life. Emma became my daughter because you loved her enough to choose what was best for her instead of what was easiest for you. I could never see you as anything other than the person who made my family possible." I stood up again, extending my hand to help her up from the bench. "But more than that," I continued, "I've watched you with Emma this past month. I've seen how you light up when she explains scientific concepts, how you encourage her curiosity, how you respect her intelligence. You're not trying to replace me or change the life we've built. You're trying to add to it. And Emma and I, we have enough love to share." Savannah took my hand and let me help her to her feet. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked directly into my eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you sure you want to complicate your simple, stable life with someone who runs away when things get difficult?" "Our life was never simple," I said with a smile. "We've dealt with medical crises, financial struggles, loss, and uncertainty. Adding love to that equation doesn't make it more complicated, it makes it more complete." The drive back to Phoenix took 2 hours, and we spent most of it talking about practical things. How often Savannah might visit, what kinds of activities she might share with Emma, how we would explain her temporary absence. But underneath the logistics, I could sense a fundamental shift in Savannah's perspective. She was no longer talking about herself as someone who had to choose between loving Emma and protecting her. She was starting to see herself as someone who could love Emma by being present in her life. When we pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex, I saw Emma's face appear in our living room window. She had been watching for us, hope and fear warring in her expression. Savannah saw her too and froze. What if she's changed her mind? What if she doesn't want to see me after I left? "There's only one way to find out," I said. "But Savannah, Emma has been asking about you every day since you left. She never stopped wanting you in her life. She just stopped believing it was possible." We walked up to our apartment together, and I unlocked the door to find Emma standing in the hallway, clutching a new origami creation, this one a complex flower made from multiple colored papers. "I made this for you," she said simply, approaching Savannah with the same brave directness she had always shown. "It's called a kusudama ball. It's made from 12 separate flowers that fit together to make something bigger and more beautiful than any of them could be alone." Savannah knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the intricate creation with reverent hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you. I'm sorry you were scared," Emma said with the matter-of-fact compassion that never ceased to amaze me. "But I'm glad Dad found you and brought you home. Are you sure you want me to be part of your family?" Savannah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Even though I made a mistake and left when I should have stayed?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Dad makes mistakes sometimes too," she said finally. "But he always tries to fix them, and he never stops loving me. If you promise to try to fix your mistakes and never stop loving me, then yes, I want you to be part of our family, I promise." Savannah whispered, and then she did what she should have done weeks earlier. She pulled Emma into her arms and held her daughter like she never intended to let her go again. 6 months later, our lives had settled into a new rhythm that felt both surprising and inevitable. Savannah visited twice a week, sometimes taking Emma to her research lab where my daughter delighted in asking questions that challenged PhD students, sometimes joining us for quiet dinners where we shared the ordinary moments that make up a family's life. Emma's confidence had returned stronger than ever, bolstered by the knowledge that she was loved by 3 parents who each brought something different to her life. Her medical recovery was complete, and she had begun talking about following in Savannah's footsteps by studying biochemistry. Savannah had made changes too. She had stepped back from some of her company's operations to make time for Emma, but rather than diminishing her work, the personal fulfillment seemed to energize her professional life. She had begun funding scholarships for single parents pursuing education in scientific fields, inspired by her own journey and Emma's adoptive story. As for me, I discovered that sharing Emma didn't diminish my role as her father, it enriched it. Watching Emma learn about her genetic heritage, seeing her benefit from Savannah's mentorship, witnessing the healing that occurred when all 3 of us chose love over fear, these experiences deepened my appreciation for the complex, beautiful ways that families can be formed and reformed. The envelope I had treasured for 9 years now sits in a frame on our living room wall, next to photos of all 3 of us together. Emma had suggested we display it as a reminder that love sometimes requires patient waiting, but always rewards courage, Sometimes the family we're meant to have isn't the one we start with, or even the one we planned for. Sometimes it's the one we create when we choose to show up for each other again and again, through fear and doubt and imperfection. Sometimes it's the one we find when we stop running from love and start running toward it instead. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it's the one that finds us in a hospital hallway, when a single act of kindness reveals connections that were always there, waiting to be discovered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.